Hello everyone, before we get into the main topic of the video today, I do have some updates and clarifications on the Leopard 2A4. So one of the falsehoods that I said is that the ammunition may be stored in this area. It's actually stored in this area here. This is more of a crew compartment where personalized stuff like items from the crew can be put in. But if we look at the general model, this is where the ammunition is stored, and I also talked about the fire suppression systems which may have been used for the ammunition. These systems were mainly used or exclusively used by the engine itself. So yeah, these come from Nico Neko on the Discord. If you want to join the Discord, there's a link in the description. On top of this as well, it seems like the Leopard 2A4 had different armor packages to it, and it seems like the variant we're going to get is the B variant of it. This is because if we had the C variant or any more of the higher up ones, we're talking about 1,000 millimeters kinetic to the front of it. So yeah, that's not going to happen because nothing would be able to pen it for a very, very long time. On top of this, the two AVs which were sent to America, they were first armed with the L7 gun, as they didn't have the 120, but one was upgunned to a 120 Rheinmetall while it was in the US for testing purposes. Now that is all the updates and clarifications. I'm going to go back to the mountains. Enjoy the video. Today in War Thunder we're looking at a user model made by a lad called Beckett. Now if you don't know who Beckett is, he's the guy behind a lot of famous user models that you may have seen, the T64BV back in the day, the Sturm Tiger, and also stuff like the Skink. A lot of his models have been created and showcased. He even made a TOG 2 model. There will be a link in the description to his War Thunder live page if you want to go and check it out. But there is a hell of a lot of interesting stuff there, and right now what he's working on is the Object 279. Now if you don't know what that is the 4-tracked kind of boat-looking heavy tank that the Soviets made with the 130mm gun. So that should be kind of cool to see, to be honest. But anyway, let's get on to the subject of this video. The KV-6 is an interesting story. It is one of those, I suppose you would call it, internet hoaxes that went around for a very long time to be believed. Another internet hoax, which is very similar to this one, is the T-34, which was armed with the 88. There is a picture out there of the chassis of a T-34 with a mounted 88 on the top of it with a blast shield. Well, this was an incredibly clever Photoshop. Well, what happened in the case of the KV-6 was a lad named Brian Fowler came along in 1995, and he took a bunch of model kits, put them together to create this monstrosity. What we're actually going to do is we'll talk about how this came about, and also we'll talk about kind of the fake history behind it, because obviously when stuff like this is created, a lot of people want to create stories around it, and they're always interesting to think about. And then we're actually going to go on to why stuff like super heavy projects never really came to the fruition. Especially when you look at the Rats from the Germans, even stuff like the TOG 2 I wouldn't class as super heavy, but there was a real reason why eventually it was just not required, and a lot of it is covered or will be covered in this video. So the vehicle itself, as I said, was made by Brian Fowler in 1995. He took two KV-2 Tamiya kits, two Tamiya KV-1E kits, an AERT-38 and an Italieri BT-5, an Italieri Katyusha, and also a Zvezda T-60 and Dragon tracks, and stuck them all together. He took the 3 KV holes, they cut and welded together with epoxy glue. The central dual KV-2 turret's pedestal was made using a shaving cream lid, and most of the details, such as the DTs, ladders, and flamethrowers, were carefully scratch built. Now, unfortunately, we don't have flamethrowers on this model, but we do have all of the rest of the stuff. So, photos of the KV-6 model were posted on the TrackLink website in 1997, alongside a fake history with it to try and make it seem more believable. Some specifications and also a set of reference books, such as the EG Dreadful Din in the Eastern Front, which is a spoof of the All Quiet on the Western Front, and the Behemoths Are Burning, which is also a spoof of the Tigers Are Burning book. So this guy took a ton of time to put into this, and I think, to be honest, it is well worth a read, because one of the things that we're running into when we look at War Thunder is, with some new vehicles coming along, after doing a lot of research into them, some of them do seem a little bit, let's just say, speculative. And this is an example of one which was completely speculative and completely made up. And yeah, so there will be a link to the original tracklink, the tracklink page, so you can have a look at it and the history behind it. So, in recent years, the KV6's popularity can be attributed to the cutaway illustration by Von Burr on DeviantArt in 2010. So it came back in popularity in, well, at least the last 10 years, which is used very often when discussing the KV6. With the proliferation of the easy-to-use Photoshop technology, I use it myself, so it must be easy. Some historical-looking photos have also appeared, supposedly, of the KV6. So what people have done, just like they did with the T-34, with the 85mm on top of it, they've started splicing together old World War II pictures to make it look like KV-1Ss, where they basically just put them together, and old KV tanks, and just slammed the chassis together and said that these are, you know, the originals. And it's very hard to tell them apart. You have to look for cuts in the pictures, and you have to look for inconsistencies, and without good software, sometimes it's quite hard to do, especially if the image itself is pixelated. So yeah, it's one of those interesting things as we go on in life. History, people are going to try and screw with it, and we're going to have to make sure to stay by the line. So let's talk about the fake history behind the KV6. So since the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were new facts which surfaced about the secret weapons which were developed by the Red Army during World War II. Of course there was. One of the most fascinating was the KV6 Behemoth. In July of 1941, Stalin learned of a single KV-2 that had held off an entire 6th Panzer Division for more than a day, which was at the Battle of Rezhnaya on the 24th of June. I think I've actually talked about that on the channel before. So, sometimes the way you make fake stuff believable is by throwing in little tidbits of truth. And I believe it was a KV-2 in this case, at the Battle of Rezhnaya. So, but yeah, you have to throw in a few little truths here and there to keep people on target. So with the success of this single tank, Stalin ordered a quick program for a land battleship based on the KV-2 design to be able to hold off hordes and hordes of panzers coming towards it. It was to have 3 turrets and be very heavily armed and armored, and be able to defend itself against all types of attack. The project was given to the joint team of Kotin and Bakyov. If you don't know who Kotin is, he is one of the most successful and prolific tank designers of that age, so once again lending credibility to the story. When the designers complained to Stalin that the insistence of 3 turrets made the vehicle too long and have an acceptable turning radius, Stalin answered, "It doesn't need to turn, it will drive straight to Berlin." Another thing that you could definitely see Stalin saying. So the final design became as the KV-6, and it was a multi-turreted tank using components of the KV-1, 2, BT-5, T-60 and T-38. The T-38 we don't actually have in game, I don't think. I believe we have the T-35. If not, I'm sorry for being wrong. It would be nice to see the T-38 though. The use of existing tank designs was necessary because of the pressure from Stalin and the strains put on the Soviet industry by the German invasion. So because of its massive weight, the tank was equipped with wading devices, permitted it to traverse rivers up to 9 feet deep. The team also designed a removable observation tower that could be used to direct the fire of the howitzers and rockets while the tank was in a turret down position. Isn't that a wonderful thing? So, on to more fake history. So the first prototype was completed in December of 1941, and it was rushed to defend Moscow. In its first action, during a dense winter fog, the rear turret accidentally fired into the center turret, and the resulting explosion completely destroyed the vehicle. The second prototype was completed in January 1942 and was sent to the Leningrad front. This one had indicators installed to show when another turret was in the line of fire, so they didn't accidentally shoot themselves. In its initial attack on the Germans, the tank broke in half when crossing a ravine, so obviously not so stable in the old superstructure. A spark ignited the leaking flamethrower fuel, and resulting explosion completely destroyed the vehicle. So that's very handy, isn't it? Especially when you're writing a fake story, you have to make it so everything was completely capitulated, so it actually fits with the fact that we don't have a lot of pictures of it. The third prototype, which was produced, had a reinforced hull and was also sent to the Leningrad front in early 1942. It did manage to shoot down 3 German aircraft, because it obviously had a bunch of 37s and machine guns on it, and in its first ground engagements, the KV-6 was firing on German positions when coincidentally all of the guns fired from the 3 o'clock position at the same time. The tremendous recoil tipped the tank into a ditch, and the severe jostling set off the 152mm ammunition, which completely destroyed the vehicle. After these failures, Stalin cancelled the project, and many of the design team members spent the rest of their lives in the gulags of Siberia. The KV-6 was nicknamed Stalin's Orchestra by the few Germans that encountered it because of the variety of weapons it deployed. Isn't that just a wonderful story? So the first one shot itself, the second one broke in half, setting the thing on fire, annihilating it, and the other one fired all the guns at the same time, tipped itself over into a ditch, and decided to explode. So yeah, that's the fake history behind it. I don't think it's believable, but it's still fun to read overall. But let's get a little bit more serious in the video. So we're going to talk, to end this, why super heavy projects nearly never worked. Basically every nation tried them at some point, and depending on logistical issues or just when it came to the technology not being there, they ran into many issues to do that. So the short history lesson in Soviet tank design is needed to explain where the KV-6 came from and why people could even believe it. The idea of a land battleship is not something uncommon with the interwar Soviet tank projects. We saw some of them, and we see some of them in-game. The T-35, the SMK, even the T-100, which I believe we don't have in-game. Even more conventional super heavy tank projects were designed during the war, and these were stuff like the KV-3, 4, and 5, but they never left the drawing board. So these are vehicles which are on the same line as stuff as the Bf-109Z or the Panther II, where they weren't technically created, but maybe they could be. In a sense of putting them into War Thunder if they want to go that imaginary route. Now, for me personally, I wouldn't, but just to say, through the history of this thing, you can see that the Soviets really tried hard on these super heavy projects. The main reason why these tanks didn't really get away from the drawing board, though, was the issues with the weight, the cancellation of the 107mm gun project, which was supposed to be for the majority of heavy tanks, which we were going to see, and heavy and super heavy tanks had proven way too expensive, inefficient with their low mobility, and huge structural problems due to the sheer weight of the thing. In fact, the only real success from any of these heavy and super heavy projects comes from the SMK, which was redesigned into the KV-1 in 1939. So the SMK is well known because it was redesigned into the KV-1. All of the rest of them just had way too many issues, and just at the end of the day, the cost of the damn things is just astronomical when you think about it. In history, the team that was behind these heavy tanks was headed by Kotin and Barikov. And Barry Cobb was part of the experimental OKMO Design Bureau since around about 1930, and he handled projects such as the T-41, the T-35, the T-29, which was the experimental upgrade for the T-28, the T-111 breakout tank, and the T-100 super heavy tank, as well as other more conventional projects such as the T-26 and T-50. So this guy had all of his fingers in all of the pies when it came to it. So the OKMO Design Bureau was broken up during the Great Purge at the start of World War II, and Barry Cobb's name does not appear on any further projects. So he basically got stricken down, which is incredibly sad, since he was one of the main guys who worked on a lot of these projects. Maybe they just had a different idea of where they wanted to go with with the projects going forward, and he was surplus to requirement. Cotin, who was the other supposed co-designer for the KV-6, was busy with other projects during the time in question. These included, but are not limited to, the T-60, 70 and 80 series, so he was making light tanks, the actual KV series, so the KV-1s and 2s, and also the IS series, the Stalin tanks, which represented in game in the IS-1, 2, Mod 44, IS-3, IS-4M, and the IS-6. He would never have time to actually supervise such a project as the KV-6 because he was working on so much other stuff. It's also true that Cotin had a history of working with multi-turreted tanks, as some of the first work focused on improving the T-28 project, and he oversaw the design team of the SMK prototype. But this is not the full story to the whole thing. Even before the war, Cotin was apprehensive about tanks with more than 2 turrets, but Stalin himself was not, and since Stalin's word was law, then it was done. Stalin was heavily involved in military affairs in 1938, and tank designs were often presented to him and a committee of his advisors. According to Tim Bean and Will Fowler's Soviet Tanks of the World War II, Stalin's Armored Might, when the SMK and T-100 wooden models were presented at a meeting of the State Defense Council on the 4th of May 1938, Cotin argued against having 3 turrets because he knew that it would severely undermine the mobility of both prototypes. Stalin agreed and reportedly responded by ripping a turret off one of the models while shouting, "Why make a tank into a department store?" So yeah, that is a brief history of the two designers, and also why stuff like the super heavy tanks never really existed. But I thought it would be worth showing you guys the KV-6 in game, even though it will never get to the proper game. Maybe we'll see it in an April Fool's event or something like that. But also, just to let you know, when I did download this thing and when I did put it into my user missions, the ammunition didn't work on the guns, which is probably why you haven't seen them firing. The only ones which fired were the machine guns. But overall, I had a fun time with it. It does also have a battle with it. There are 2 user missions with it, so I'd say, go and give it a go. And unfortunately, a lot of Beckett's vehicles right now don't work properly in the game because they're either missing files or the game has just been updated to a point where a lot of the stuff that is required for user missions is not present for those vehicles. Hopefully soon he updates them alongside finishing the Object 279, and I just want to thank him, to be honest, for making these wonderful models. It's always nice to see new things, whether it's weird or wonderful, but hopefully in the future we see a few more. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.